Up for a game of golf? How about trying to get a hole-in-one with a couch instead? Or accounting for gravity when slingshotting your golf ball around planets? How about some video game references? This game might look like golf for about the first 5 minutes, but after that, all bets are off as you descend down a rabbit hole of whatever wacky hijinks the devs decide to put you through. And from twists on Portal to turning golf into a racing game, they've got pretty big imaginations. But that's enough introduction, it's time to dive down that rabbit hole and get this review going. As always, I'm Alex, and this is First 5, where I ask if games are worth your time, not your money. I played a game for 5 hours, and I'm gonna tell you if those were 5 hours well spent. And today, we're breaking the rules of golf and reality in What the Golf! What the Golf is a hard game to talk about without just falling into a stream of silly anecdotes. Like this one level where I had to load furniture into a moving truck to help some people move, but as the truck pulled away, I suddenly had control of the house they just left, and I had to putt it across town to their new plot of land. And that's the sort of thing you're in for with What the Golf. Sometimes the game is just surprising visual gags, like when you go to putt the golf ball into a hole and instead launch the golfer, or the time I was literally putting around the energy meter. See, I've already fallen into it again. What the Golf is just a series of goofy twists, one long stand-up comedy skit with 100 hard left turns.
Here's my idea for a fucking sport. I knock a ball in a gopher hole.
But the comedy never falls into lol-so-random territory. Perhaps the greatest feat of all is that What the Golf manages to feel coherent and almost like there's a natural progression to its insanity. Yes, the game is utterly absurd, and yes, many of its jokes work because they catch you by surprise, but just like how every mechanic has a simple introduction before it's built upon, every punchline and visual gag has a setup. You just don't recognize it for what it is until you get the payoff. But how the heck does this thing actually play? Like everything else, What the Golf likes to constantly screw with its gameplay, but there are a few common denominators. Just like any other golf game, you mostly move objects around the world by lining up your shot, then charging how hard you want to hit it. And in the broad strokes, the game usually still emulates golf in that you're trying to move an object of some sort from point A past a bunch of obstacles to point B. But that's about where the similarities end. Sometimes your goal isn't a hole in the green, but a soccer net. Sometimes the soccer net is the object you're knocking around. Sometimes you're playing on a 3D plane, sometimes you're playing in 2D. Sometimes you're hitting a couch, and sometimes you're launching beer rocket-propelled TVs. Yes, that's a thing. But I think you're starting to see the issue here in trying to describe What the Golf. This is a game that's hard to tag with just a few simple phrases because it is constantly changing itself up. Sometimes it's a racing game, sometimes it's a puzzle. And the deeper down the rabbit hole you go, the more even those basic constants begin to fade away. It's almost easier to just describe this game by just listing everything it does, chapter by chapter. There is one other consistency though, and that's What the Golf's progression system. What the Golf is divided up into a series of worlds that, surprise surprise, each revolve around one particular perversion of golf's rules. One world turns it into soccer, one world turns it into Mario, and so on. Each world gets about a half dozen levels, each of which gets 3 different stages. You can complete the first stage of each level and just move on, but a lot of What the Golf's best moments lie in the second and third challenge stages. Some of them are just a straightforward repeat of the level where you have to get under par, and some of them are just a harder version. In most of these cases, the game isn't really out to bust your balls, but there's the occasional level that demands perfect execution, and in these cases, What the Golf's rapid-fire humor-centric gameplay grinds to a dead halt. What the Golf is fun when you're discovering new things, but its gameplay isn't deep enough to hold up when you have to repeat a level a dozen times to get through it. But for every level like that, there's 5 more that throw in an extra mechanical twist that completely changes how you approach the same stage. And if you complete every level's challenges, you get a nifty trophy, but the real reward is the gameplay you had along the way. What the Golf's also got some pretty pitch-perfect presentation as well. Wrap all that madness up in a lighthearted little soundtrack with a lot of acapella and some stripped-down, kind of minimalist visuals, and yeah, you've got a pretty solid, cheerful, and most importantly, actually funny little game. I know I've kind of struggled with comedy games on this channel, but hey, I finally found one that tickled my fancy. But what do you get out of 5 hours with What the Golf? Well, the game has a handy-dandy progress tracker that tells me I've completed 84% of the game, so there's an oddly specific statistic for you. And I've gotta say that What the Golf's been entertaining for a vast majority of its run-through. Some of its levels can be a bit frustrating in how they allow no room for error whatsoever, but by and large, What the Golf is a really good time. And every time it started feeling like it might be drying up or getting old, it's suddenly on to the next twist and everything feels fresh again. About a year ago, I covered another game called Pool Panic, and came away with a very mixed reception to it. What the Golf is what I wish Pool Panic had been. A wacky game that might wear the skin of golf, but screws with it to the point of unrecognizability. That's less about trying to make something mechanically crunchy, and cares more about just throwing as much weird stuff at the wall as possible. And luckily, 90% of that weird stuff sticks. The game's a blast, go check it out. And speaking of Pool Panic, you can go check that review out too. And if you want more short, joyful, whimsical little games, last week's quarterly wrap-up has got you covered. But I hope you enjoyed this first 5 review. If you did, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button. If you're looking for games that value your time and don't pad themselves, I'm your guy. Thanks for watching this far, and I'll see you all next week.